Hey, good morning, Pastor Steve here. There's a lot of things I don't understand. Yesterday we looked at the fact that Joseph was left in prison for a long time because the butler forgot. Well, today we move ahead to Genesis chapter 50. And the brothers sent a messenger to Joseph after his dad's death, said, "Your father commanded before he died, saying, so shall you say to Joseph, forgive, I pray you now, the trespass of your brothers in their sin, for they did unto you evil. And now I ask you, forgive the trespass of the servants of God of your father." Joseph wept when they spoke to him. And his brothers went and fell down before his face, and they said, "We are your servants." Joseph said, "Fear not. Am I in the place of God?" And he said something very astute. "As for you, you thought evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring to pass as it is this day, to save many people alive." Yesterday we left him in prison. Many years have passed. It was only a few years after the last event that Joseph was elevated to second in the land in Egypt. And remember the story how his brothers who had plotted against him and rented his room, came down and didn't recognize him as they came down to get grain. Well, as a result, ultimately, they all came, after he'd sifted them, down to Egypt. And he saved their families and their herds from starvation. The brothers seemed like they were nervous and always looking over their shoulders. But Joseph was faithful in slavery, he was faithful in prison, and he was also faithful in seeing God's design. And by the way, that takes a great deal of faith. Here Joseph explains to his brothers, "Look, man, the things that you saw, that we see as horrific, as difficult, as uncomfortable, as unfair, can be used of God to bring about a far greater good for eternity." In my childhood, I remember when those 5 missionaries were slain down on the Corregui beach down in Ecuador. Sad and horrible time. I remember that day. I was just a little kid. But God fertilized the soil with the blood of those brethren. And the once savage Aucas, which that's what it means, became the peaceful Warani. And they came to Jesus for the very wives and family of those that they killed. It's drastic, isn't it? I know that God always knows best. I also know that he never checks with me. And his ways surely aren't my ways. And I can only rest in the thought, you thought evil against me, but God meant it for good. Bad stuff happening in your life? In a prison, a slavery of sorts? Family doesn't understand you, friends have forgotten you? Remember that God is the Redeemer of souls and the Redeemer of situations. Pray for understanding, but keep standing. And remember this, God meant it for good. You ponder that, Pastor.